So today I want to talk a little bit about two types of the fear of death. There are kind of two categories I want to hone in on, and that is the fear of death of self, and then the fear of death of others. Now, there are two particular temperament types, and if you're not familiar with temperament, stick around to this channel. You're going to be hearing a lot more about this temperament thing in the coming videos. But I'm a certified temperament counselor. That's one thing I'm heavily studied in, and so I find it to be very useful. But there are two particular temperament types. One is called the melancholy, and the other is called the supine. And there are other temperament types, but for today's video, these two temperament types seem to experience the two types of fear of death that I want to address. And if you can resonate with irrational fears of death, either you're scared of dying for some reason, or you're scared of someone you love, someone you know dying, this particular video, I hope to give you a little insight into why that might be, and hopefully point you in an encouraging direction in beginning to walk through that. Now, let's start with the first one, the fear of death for yourself. Now, what you need to know about a melancholy, if you can resonate with the irrational fear of death, you're scared of dying. Maybe this may manifest in other forms like OCD, where you have compulsions of maybe a hit and run OCD, or health anxieties, where you're worried about all the cancers in the book, and anytime something happens, you're concerned that you have a terminal illness of some sort, or maybe it manifests in some other anxiety, but at the core root of it, you are scared of either dying prematurely or even being taken off. Maybe there are some instances where you're scared of being arrested and taken off to prison, and you're wondering where does this some of this come from. Maybe you can recognize anxiety going back to childhood in various ways of things that you were scared of. Maybe it was a religious anxiety where you were scared of going to hell. You were scared of punishment. You were overly compulsive, anxious of committing the unforgivable sin. That's a very popular religious-based anxiety that we see in a lot of younger people, but even older people that are newer in faith to Christ and learning their way through theology and the Word. But if you find yourself having a irrational fear of dying, and I'm not talking about once or twice sporadically, even though this can inform that, I'm specifically talking, though, more towards people who recognize a pattern of it or a cycle of it, and it's a little bit more frequent. You might be, and it's impossible to know without taking the assessment, but you might be a melancholy in some area of your temperament. And this is because melancholies are reliable, responsible, dependable. They are loyal. They're trustworthy. They are people who, if we were looking at the attachment theory, they are people who really, really trust themselves, but they are skeptical and don't really trust other people very much. They can't depend on other people, but they can depend on themselves. These are people likely to say things such as, like, why delegate when I can do it better myself? Right? Because they trust that they're going to be reliable, responsible, dependable, competent, okay, with the tasks. And they don't really trust others necessarily, even though if you have a melancholy who is an employer and you have to hire people, you're going to want to hire other melancholies because you also don't want to micromanage. You don't want to be micromanaged, and you don't want to micromanage. You don't want to have to control. You want to be able to trust someone else is going to be competent. And so you tend to look for other melancholies because they end up being just as concerned with being reliable, responsible, dependable. And you can see that, and you end up trusting them. But when it comes to how this plays into the irrational fear of death, melancholies let's say the idea of a melancholy being removed from people that depend on them can create a high sense of anxiety. If you're a husband and a father and you're melancholy, by the way, temperament removed, the fear of death, scientifically, research leans towards the idea that the fear of death peaks at middle age and just in general. But as a husband and father who's a melancholy, the thought of you dying, especially at middle-aged years when your family is young, maybe you're a believer Christian, you're like the thought of who's going to take care of my family, the thought of who's going to disciple my kids or raise my kids in this society that they're subject to. Like, what's to come of them if I'm not there shepherding, if I'm not there? And so these thoughts can create a deep sense of fear and a deep sense of anxiety and stress at the thought of, if I die, I'm now forced against my will to not be reliable, responsible, dependable. And I want to be there for my wife, children, or other people that may be in your life's context that rely on you. And so the removal of yourself stresses you out because of your deep care and love and concern for those you love and who are close to you and who depend on you. Now, I want to pause on the melancholy for just a second, and let's talk about the supine temperament. If you've experienced that, I don't really ever fear dying. Like, I don't have any sort of health anxieties I've ever worried about this cancer or that, or I don't have OCD, like a hit and run OCD for the melancholy. They may be scared of going to prison for a long time. So they hit someone and ran, and they have a hit and run OCD, and that's an anxiety. And really, a fear that's connected to that is the idea of them being separated from their wife and kids, missing their kids growing up, not being able to work and support and take care of their family. And so the idea of going to jail or prison for long periods of time can be just as stressful as the idea of dying, because it compromises this area of being reliable, responsible, dependable, and for people they love deeply. Now, a supine, they don't necessarily experience that very often. Instead, they're more likely to experience an irrational fear of a spouse or a parent or someone close in that way passing away and dying. And this is because the supine is a little bit different from the melancholy in that they are very dependable people, meaning, well, I don't think I said that right. They are people who heavily depend on someone else in their life for something. And depending on what category you're a supine in, will determine what those are. If you're a supine in the affection category, you may depend on your spouse to show you love and approval and affection. And the idea of them being removed is the idea of like your world collapsing, because they are such a support system for you that if you removed them, your stress and your anxiety would fly through the roof because you depend so heavily on them for something. And there may be even areas in your life where, if we're looking at attachment theory, where you are less dependent on yourself and you tend to trust others a little bit more and you don't trust yourself as much. That would kind of be the supine's role, like where they would land on the attachment theory quadrant. And so they're very, very deeply connected to and dependent on others. Maybe if you're a supine in inclusion or in the control categories, you may feel this way towards like a colleague or a boss at work, or you may feel this way about your team at work, or just some other areas that are different interpersonal relationships. You may, in your marriage, if you're supine in control, you may really rely on your husband or your wife, the spouse, that for maybe financial, like a financial direction, like the peace and security. You trust your spouse, and if you removed your spouse from the picture, You just begin to imagine worst case scenarios for a lot of things, and it causes you deep, deep stress and anxiety at the thought of losing your spouse or loved one. And so, if you're supine, you may experience, and you have anxieties. You may, from time to time, experience an irrational fear of losing someone else. Now, I want to be clear. This doesn't mean that the melancholy would not be repulsed and devastated at the thought of losing a loved one. It just means if they're going to have an irrational anxiety that grips them, it's going to probably be first in regard to their premature death versus someone else's. And in like manner, if you're a supine, this doesn't mean a supine isn't susceptible to a fear of premature death or a fear of, similar things in that category. It just means if they're going to have an irrational fear or a intense anxiety over premature death for themselves or losing someone that is really close to them, they're going to err towards and more likely experience the irrational fear and anxiety and stress created at the thought of losing a spouse or a loved one, or maybe a coworker quitting, or and kind of abandoning them, and they're having all this weight on their shoulders and stress, and so they're like fearing, maybe their team abandoning them, or an upline just quitting and causing chaos in the workplace. So these are going to kind of be the differences between those two. Now, if you are someone who experiences an irrational fear of dying in self, and it's truly, you can trace it back to one of the areas that causes you anxiety or stress is the thought of loved ones being left alone. This is personally something, I'm a melancholy. And so these are personally things bridges that I've personally crossed and still have to cross on a regular basis. But exploring that with the Lord and being transparent and honest with the Lord, with those fears and with those anxieties, and allowing Him to show you the areas in your life that He wants to invite you into a greater degree of trusting Him. And my encouragement would be to accept any invitation that the Lord is giving you and presenting to you. And if the invitation is revealed to you through your anxieties, these areas in your life where it's being revealed to you, the areas where you lack trust in the Lord. That is one useful thing about anxiety, is if we allow it, it's an invitation into knowing God and being known by God in a new area. And it's revealing to us areas that we don't completely trust, or maybe don't have completely surrendered unto the Lord. And we're still trying to control things that are not controllable. We're still trying to grab and control things that are just outside of our control. And it's that effort to grab, a puff of smoke that's exhausting, and it's stressful, and it wears us down. And of course, we're doing this in the invisible, immaterial self. And so if it's like this anxiety drains me, it makes me exhausted, it's because we're literally trying to exert energy grabbing smoke that's just, you can't grab it. There are certain things in life which we just can't control. Likewise, for the supine who may be experiencing irrational anxieties or fears of losing someone they love or care about deeply, these are also invitations into identifying areas where we don't trust the Lord. Ultimately, we're trying to control things, or we are longing for the control of things that are completely outside of our control, and we have to trust the Lord with them. And at the end of the day, all of these anxieties for both of these fears, and for many other anxieties even, is a spotlight on areas we don't trust. It's a spotlight on areas that we're trying to control, which by nature are uncontrollable things. And it's an invitation into knowing God in a new way and in a new area. And it's an invitation in experientially being known by God, allowing Him to come in and comfort us and to reveal to us the things within us that He wants to expose, bring to light, maybe heal, restore, or to mature. And so I hope that this video has been informative and helpful for you. Again, if you're interested in temperament and knowing more about that, maybe even identifying where you are on that, stick around, because there's going to be a lot more information on how you can go about that. And there's certainly going to be, Lord willing, a lot more information baked into my conversations and future videos regarding the temperament. So I invite you to subscribe, hang out on the channel, and hopefully you'll come across videos that help you and edify you and meet you right where you're at. But at the end of the day, as always, until next time, God bless you guys.